After much preparation, Marisa, Chris, and Fatima are now ready to present their case in immigration court. Fatima will be the first witness, and then one of the experts will testify in person. Another expert will testify telephonically, but we won't hear that testimony on the video. Before the direct examination begins, however, Marisa and Chris will have one last opportunity to correct any omissions or inconsistencies that appear in the written submission. They need to do that because any inconsistencies could adversely impact a client's credibility. When you're viewing this segment, pay special attention to some unique aspects of immigration court. First, the federal rules of evidence do not apply. And second, it's not uncommon for a judge to actually interrupt during direct examination to ask his own questions. Also, pay special attention to the questions that DHS uses. Some of his questions are designed to test the client's credibility. And DHS counsel is also permitted to ask questions about issues that were not directed in direct examination.
All rise. Please be seated. Thank you. We're back on the record. Today is December 15th in continued removal proceedings for Fatima Torre, file number A12345-678. The respondent is present in court today. She continues to be represented by counsel Chris Nugent and Marisa Chancharillo. The Department of Homeland Security is represented again today by Stephen Spiegelhalter. The respondent, there is present in court today also an interpreter in the French language, Ms. Sandrine Forgeron. This case is set today for a hearing, first of all, on the issue of removability. There is a continued issue of removability on a prior fraud charge under Section 212A6C of the Act. In addition, the case is set today for a hearing on the issue of relief from removal, specifically asylum, withholding of removal, and relief under the Convention Against Torture. The court record at this point consists of two documents, the notice to appear and the filing of the I-589, which was done at the last hearing. First of all, are there any additional documents or any amendments to the documents that have already been submitted, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. We have several amendments to the documents. We have an amended page 2 to the I-589 application for asylum. There are 3 paragraphs that have been amended on this page, and it was based on further interviewing with our client. We also have an amended affidavit for the client. Page 8, paragraph 30 needed to be amended. We also were able to secure the amended constitution to the country of Guinea, which was recently amended.
Mr. Spiegelhalter, any submissions from the government?
Yes, Your Honor. We have one additional submission, which is the country profile of Guinea from the United States Department of State.
Do you have any objection to what's marked as Exhibit Number 3? This is the replacement page, paragraph 3 of the I-589. Do you have any objection to the amendment made there and its admission into the record?
No, Your Honor.
The next issue is Exhibit Number 5, and this is the constitutional amendments implemented by the November 11th referendum. And this is from the Republic of Guinea. Have you had a chance to review that? And if so, do you have any objections to it?
Your Honor, I had a chance to review it for about 25 seconds as we were talking here. I have several objections. The first is that it was given to us at this late date and appears to be in French. I don't know how I could possibly address it during the hearing.
Your Honor, there is a translation attached to the document.
I find it hard to believe that the only source for this document was the embassy in Guinea bringing back to the United States. I find it hard to believe that it was, in fact, not available for this hearing.
Well, Your Honor, as you can tell, the Constitution was only recently amended several months ago, and we diligently contacted the U.S. Embassy for a copy of this, and they did not even have it on file with the embassy, and they had to physically go to the Ghanaian government to try to get a copy of this.
Okay. Mr. Spiegelhalter, anything else on this document?
No, Your Honor.
Well, first of all, I have to agree with the government counsel that I think this could have been submitted at an earlier date. It is a large document to be given on the date of the hearing. However, I'm going to withhold making any ruling at this moment. I'll hear the testimony. It is marked as Exhibit Number 5. I'll withhold judgment at this point. The next issue is Exhibit Number 6. This is the Country Report on Human Rights Practices from the Department of State, and to you, Mr. Nugent, or Ms. Chancharillo, are there any objections to this document?
Yes, Your Honor, we object to this document because of timeliness. There is no reason that this profile could not have been provided to us earlier than this date. I believe it's been, according to the date on this country profile, it has been available for several months.
Mr. Spiegelhalter?
Yes, Your Honor. This is the type of document that's regularly used in these cases. I would imagine that perhaps counsel was even familiar with it outside of my having submitted it. And moreover, because it contains information from the United States government that probably synopsizes some of what my opponents would contend is relevant, I do not believe there's any prejudice.
I agree with the Respondent's counsel that this could have been submitted at an earlier date. However, it is from the State Department, and I am mandated by regulations to consider information by the State Department, so I am going to admit it into the record in accordance with the regulations. So it'll be admitted into the record as Exhibit Number 6. Are there any other evidentiary or documentary matters to be dealt with preliminarily?
One final, Your Honor. Some of the affidavits, two of the affidavits that were submitted into the record or submitted to us with the evidence, the affidavit of Wahida Toure and the affidavit of Fatoumata Larodere,
Right.
were not notarized.
Mr. Spiegelhalter, I understand what you're getting at, but I think the regulation in question regarding authentication of documents only requires that official documents be authenticated by a Foreign Service officer. We did have a prior issue which was brought up at the removability phase regarding the fraud charge under allegation number 5 and the charge under section 212A6C. On the factual allegation number 5 regarding the fraud charge, I am going to sustain that allegation, and I will also sustain the charge under section 212A6CI. I find that there is clear and convincing evidence of the charge of fraud. I also find it implausible that a 16-year-old coming to the United States would not be aware that documents that she was submitting did not belong to her. First of all, let me swear in the interpreter at this point. Do you swear that your interpretation today from French to English will be true and correct to the best of your ability?
I do.
Do you swear that the testimony you give today will be true and correct, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please have a seat. A few things I wish to advise you. You're going to be asked some questions first by your attorneys, and who will be doing the direct examination?
I will, Your Honor.
Okay. By your attorney and then by the counsel for the Department of Homeland Security. If at any point you don't understand a question, please say so. It'll be repeated for you. If you don't know the answer to a question, just say so. You are being taped in these proceedings, and please keep your voice up for the tape machine. Counsel, whenever you're ready, go ahead and start.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you state your name, please?
My name is Fatima Toure.
When were you born?
I was born July 4th.
Where were you born?
I was born in Conakry, Guinea,
Why did you flee Guinea?
because my life was in danger and I feared that the government would continue to beat and harm me
Why did they harm you?
because I am Malinke and because my family is involved in politics in Guinea and my uncle is working to change the government.
You said you are Malinke. Is that your ethnicity?
Yes, it is the largest ethnic group in Guinea.
Fatima, who are your parents?
My mother's name is Waida Toure and my father's name is Malik Toure. He died when I was 12. At that point, my uncle moved into our home and he helped support my family and my mother.
What is your uncle's name?
His name is Lamine Touré.
How are you related to him?
He is like a father to me. He took care of me and my family after my father died.
Do you have a formal family relationship with him?
I'm not sure what you are asking.
Okay. Where is he? Well, strike that. Is he really your uncle?
No, he is a distant cousin of my father.
And what is your relationship with him?
We are very close. He supports my family financially, and he talked to me about the political situation in Guinea, and he gave me a lot of support.
Where is he now?
I don't know. He has been hiding for the past two years
Why is he hiding?
because
Objection, lack of foundation.
I'll allow the question. Go ahead.
Thank you.
because his life is also in danger, and President Conte and the Party of Unity and Progress, they are called the PUP. They are looking for him.
I'm sorry, that's the PUP?
Yes.
Fatima, what happened when the Presidential Guard came to your school?
They stormed my school and they found the le surveillant.
The counselor?
Your Honor, I think there was an error in translation just now.
Well, counsel, if you're not satisfied with the court's interpreter, I can reset this case and find another interpreter, and we can change interpreters if you think that the interpreter has not been qualified or interpreting correctly.
Oh, no, Your Honor. I think it's just this one word, and it may have to do with, different educational structures between the countries.
Okay. And what is the change that you're suggesting?
Well, she used the word counselor, and I think the word was not supposed to be counselor. It was supposed to be vice principal.
Okay. To the interpreter, you've heard the suggested change. Do you agree with it? Do you want me to have it repeated, or do you want to have the question repeated for you?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like the defendant to clarify.
Okay, thank you. Then why don't you go back and ask the question again and have the question answered again. We'll see if we can't get the correct translation. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. What happened when the Presidential Guard came to your school?
They went to find le surveillant de l'école.
The vice principal.
And he called me into the hallway, and when I stepped out there, I saw the Presidential Guard, and they had Fatoumata with them, and then I knew that we were in serious trouble.
What happened?
They took Fatoumata and me, and they took us out of the building.
Did anyone from the school try to stop them?
No, because everybody feared the Presidential Guard, and they were all hiding in the classrooms and in the offices.
How did you feel when you saw the Presidential Guard standing with Fatoumata?
I was very scared. I was terrified.
Counsel, Fatoumata, just for the interpreter and for the transcription of the record, what's the spelling on that?
The spelling is Fatoumata.
Thank you.
Please
Proceed.
continue, Fatima.
I felt sick to my stomach because I did not know what would happen.
Where did the Presidential Guard take you and Fatoumata?
They took us to their jeep and they drove us to jail.
And what happened when you and Fatoumata got to jail?
They brought us to an interrogation room and they demanded that we tell them exactly where my uncle was.
And what What happened when you were in the interrogation room?
They touched me.
I'm sorry, please keep your voice up a little bit.
What,
They touched me.
what do you mean by that, Fatima?
One of the guard, he came in with his pants undone, and they took turns. They took turns violating Fatoumata and me.
I know this is hard to talk about, Fatima, but I have to ask, how long did that last?
Over 2 hours.
I'm sorry, how long?
Over 2 hours.
Did the guards say anything to you?
I wanted to know where my uncle was, and they called us racial names.
How many guards were involved?
I don't remember. 6, maybe 7.
Did you tell anyone that you were raped?
No. I told no one. I was too ashamed. You were the first person that I told. And je l'ai dit aussi au psychologue.
I also told the psychologist.
Did you have any medical effects from the rape?
Yes, I was in pain for a long time.
Your Honor, can I ask for a brief recess for my client to compose herself?
Let's go off the record at this point. Let me ask this while we're off the record. Have counsel spoken, have you from each side spoken with each other about the case and about the possibility of resolving this case?
Yes, Your Honor, we spoke briefly about that with DHS counsel.
And what's the position of the service at this point?
Your Honor, at this point, we think there are too many factual issues that are left to resolve for us to settle this in any way at this point.
We're back on the record. Counsel, you ready to proceed?
Yes. Fatima, you said that that the guards were calling you names. Can you be a little bit more specific, please?
They would say things like dirty malenke and other names in Guinean that I cannot translate.
Again, Ms. Troy, you're going to have to please keep your voice up a little bit. Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you. When did you decide to flee to the United States?
It was in mid-November
What prompted you to leave?
because I was repeatedly arrested, and I feared that they were losing patience with me, and I didn't know if the next time they arrested me, if they would keep me in prison or if they would kill me. So I could not keep living like that. And ces pensées me troublaient pendant chaque minute de la journée.
These thoughts ate at me every moment of every day.
Did someone...
But, excuse me, counsel. But when you were detained by the guards, they just mentioned about being a dirty malinke. They did not question you or accuse you of anything else. Is that correct?
No, they wanted to know where my uncle was.
They also asked you about your uncle.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Continue, counsel.
Thank you. Fatima, did someone help you to leave?
Yes. it was a friend of my uncle. I call him Tonton, and Fatoumata was the one who suggested that I go see him.
How did he help you?
I told him about what happened to me, and he agreed that I needed to leave the country. So he told me that it would take him a few weeks to get everything together. And I was very scared and very terrified because I knew that I had to leave all
Objection, Your Honor. This is non-responsive narrative at this point.
Sustained. Please.
What? Thank you, Your Honor. What did Tonton? What did he tell you when you went to see him?
He told me that that I would be going to the United States.
And how did he say that was going to happen?
He said he would help me get the papers to go to the United States, and that he would take me there, and once we got there, that I would be on my own.
And what sort of papers?
I did not know exactly what he was going to do, but I had to get a residence card, and because we needed to travel. But I was afraid that if I got a residence card in my neighborhood of Kipe, that it would be assigned to somebody in Kipe would let the presidential guard that they would tell them that I was traveling, and so I could not trust them.
So where did you go to get a residence card?
I decided to go to Mdalaye, which is a neighbor in another area in Conakry, and I got my residence card there, and then I gave it to Tonton, and then he gave it back to me when we arrived in the United States.
Did anyone know you were leaving?
Objection calls for speculation.
I'll allow it. Overruled. Continue.
No, no one except Tonton, and maybe Fatoumata knew that I wanted to leave, but I never told her the exact date when I was leaving.
Other than the residence card, did you obtain any other paperwork for yourself?
No, Tonton took care of everything else.
Did you ever question the validity of the documents?
No, I had no reason to question it because I trusted Tonton. He was a respected person in my neighborhood, and I just believed what he told me, and if I thought that the paper would not good, I never would have used them.
Well, did you take a look at this paperwork before you use it?
I just trusted that it was okay. I did not know what was needed or what the real paper looked like. I just trusted that it was good paper, that it was.
Well, did it have your name on it or someone else's name on it?
It had my name on it.
Okay, continue, counsel.
Thank you. Other than your residence card, Fatima, did you have any other documents when you fled Guinea?
No, just my residence card.
What did you do with that card?
I submitted it with my asylum papers
When did you arrive in the United States?
in late November
Where did you arrive?
at the JFK airport in New York.
And what happened when you arrived?
I was stopped by the immigration official who told me that my papers were not proper.
When did you come to know that the visa was improper?
That's when the INS official told me.
And what did you tell them?
I told them that I did not know that my papers were not proper, but that I could not go back to Guinea because I would be killed. and that I wanted asylum in the United States.
Fatima, is there anywhere in Guinea where you would be safe?
No, my family has disappeared. I have nowhere to go. I can't ask friends to... Je peux pas demander aux amis de me loger.
I can't ask my friends to stay with them.
Because it would be dangerous for them.
Okay. And what would happen to you if you were forced to return to Guinea?
Objection calls for speculation.
Part of the test here is her subjective fear, and she's allowed to testify to her subjective fear, so I'll allow the question. Objection overruled. Answer the question, ma'am.
If I were to go back to Guinea, I would be arrested, tortured, and I would be killed.
Thank you. I have no more questions at this time.
All right. Mr. Spiegelhalter?
Yes, Your Honor. Your uncle was a member of the UFR, is that correct?
Yes.
And he attended meetings regularly, is that correct?
Yes.
When did he attend meetings?
As I said, on weekends, usually on Sunday.
What time on Sundays?
I don't know.
He attended meetings every Sunday, and you're not sure what time that was?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Well, she's made her uncle a central part of this claim, and I've given counsel substantial leeway on direct. I'm going to allow the service to go forward. Continue, Mr. Spiegelhalter.
Usually I guess he would be gone in the morning.
Where were the meetings held?
I don't know.
Did you ever attend the meetings?
No.
Do you know what went on at the meetings?
Not really.
Do you know anyone else besides your uncle who attended the meetings?
My friend Fatoumata from school, sometimes she attended.
But she didn't tell you what happened at the meetings?
No, not in detail.
Where were you when they came to your school?
I was in my classroom.
Were you in the same class with Fatoumata?
No, we were in different classrooms.
Are your teachers there Malinke?
Yes.
Is your vice principal Malinke?
Yes.
When the soldiers came to your school, did they beat your teachers?
No.
Did they arrest your teachers?
No.
Did they rape any of your teachers?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. I'm not sure this is relevant, Mr. Spiegelhalter.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
She testified that one of the reasons she's being persecuted is because of her Malinke origin. I'm simply showing that other people similarly situated, of the same social group, of the same ethnicity, pardon me, who are in the same places were not treated the same, calling into doubt the causal connection between the two.
Well, she's also testified that her uncle was a central part of this, so I'm going to sustain the objection. Go ahead and move on.
Thank you. When the soldiers took you to the prison, did they ask you where your uncle was?
Yes.
Did they ask Fatoumata as well where your uncle was?
Yes.
You testified that you came to the United States with papers that you were able to obtain. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that included some sort of residence card, is that what you called it?
Yes.
And this residence card you were not able to get in your own city, is that correct?
Yes.
Because the police there would recognize you, is that why?
The people working in the office where I had to get the residence card, I was afraid that they would contact the presidential guard and tell them that I was planning to leave.
And why do you suspect that the people in the neighboring city would not have called the presidential guard?
I don't know, because I just thought that some people knew that I had been arrested a few times, so in a different area that they would not know that I was under suspicion, But in Kipe, some people knew that I was under suspicion.
This neighboring city, how far away is it from your city?
It is like 40 kilometers.
40 kilometers?
And is the PUP in control of that city as well?
Objection, Your Honor. He's
No.
asking for testimony that's not based on anything in the record.
Well, it's somewhat relevant, and if she doesn't know the answer, she can state that she doesn't know. So I'm going to allow the question. Do you know the answer, ma'am?
No, I don't.
Let me ask you this. Were you able to strike that? Did you approach a government office for these papers in that neighboring city?
I do not understand.
What kind of office was it that gave you your residence card?
It was. I don't think it was. I'm not sure if it was a government office or not, but it's each city has it's like a town hall where you go. Each area in Conakry has this place where you can go and get your residence card. I suppose that the government might be involved with it, but I'm not sure.
Okay, let's talk about your involvement in the UFR. Did you ever speak publicly at UFR functions?
No,
Did you ever organize UFR functions?
no,
Did you ever attend public meetings of the UFR?
no.
You said that police arrested you on several occasions, correct?
Yes,
And that's because your uncle, you believe it's because your uncle was involved in the UFR.
yes.
Is it possible that the government was investigating your uncle's involvement in illegal activities?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculative.
I'm going to sustain that. I see no evidence there in the record. And if you want to establish a foundation for that, I'll allow you. But at this point, there's nothing to show that, so I'm going to sustain that objection.
Okay. Your uncle would leave on Sundays, correct? And you had no idea where he was?
Yes.
And you don't know what he was doing?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
I'm laying the foundation, Your Honor.
I'll let you lay the foundation. Go ahead, but hopefully there's something at the end of this.
And he was, and you don't know what he was doing at those points?
I mean, he told me he was going to the meeting of the UFR, but he would be gone for a long time all day. I don't know if as soon as he left he went to the meeting or if he went to do something else before, but he would tell me that that's where he was going.
And you testified about Tauntaun, correct, on your direct examination?
Yes.
And is he also a member of the UFR?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Tauntaun was one of your uncle's friends, is that correct?
Yes.
And he gave you documents?
Yes.
Did those documents turn out to be falsified?
That's what I was told when I arrived when the immigration officer told me that they were not proper.
Okay. You said that you were raped by the soldiers, is that correct?
Yes.
And that they called you names dealing with your ethnicity, is that correct?
Yes.
Did any of them say anything about, we took you because you were Malinke?
They did not say it like that, no.
What did they say?
They would just call me racial names. First they would ask me where my uncle was, and when I did not answer, they would say, "Dirty Malinke, you think you guys will have control of the government, but you would never have control of the government."
So they seemed to call you names when they were angry, is that correct?
Yes.
And now that you're here in the United States, what do you plan to do if you're allowed to remain?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Now that you're here in the United States, what do you plan to do if you are allowed to remain?
I would like to start a new life, to have some peace of mind, and to continue my education.
And you've had relatives come here before for education, have you not?
Yes, my uncle.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Just a couple of questions, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Fatima, have you ever gone to any political meetings?
Yes.
Okay, what kinds of political meetings?
It was with the student branch of the UFR.
And what is that called?
It is called the Future Union of Republican Forces.
Okay. And why did you attend those meetings?
Because I believe in their cause, and my uncle's group is working very hard to change the government so we can have a democratic government. And I support these efforts.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
The court recross from the government?
No, Your Honor.
I just have a question or two, ma'am. In response to what your counsel just asked, after reading your affidavit and listening to your testimony, the impression I get is you're fleeing because of the harm you fear because of your connections to your uncle, and possibly because of your Malinke tribal membership, not really because of your own political work. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, let me make sure of that. And you testified earlier that your family has disappeared. Have you had any contact with anyone back in your country since you've left your country?
Yes, I did speak to my mother,
Okay.
and she was able to supply a doctor's report for me.
All right. So you have had contact with your mother. All right. Anyone else?
No.
All right. We're back on the record. And counsel, who is your next witness?
Dr. Denise Michulka, Your Honor.
Okay. And Dr. Michulka, if you could stand while I swear you in.
Sure.
Do you swear that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, please have a seat. Thank you. And Dr. Michulka, you're going to be asked some questions by your counsel and then by the counsel for the Department of Homeland Security. You are being taped, so please try to keep your voice up.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Counsel, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please state your name and address for the record?
My name is Dr. Denise Michalka. I work with the Liberty Center for Survivors of Torture. That is at 5902 North 5th Street, and that's Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 19120.
Could you please state your current occupation and your education for the record?
I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm licensed in the state of Pennsylvania and Delaware. I have a doctorate degree in clinical psychology from the State University of New York at Albany, a master's degree in clinical psychology from the same university, and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Temple University here in Philadelphia.
And what is your current occupation, Dr. Michulka?
I am the director of the Liberty Center for Survivors of Torture, which is a specialty center for the rehabilitation of survivors of torture.
Have you ever testified before in court?
Yes, I have been working with survivors of torture and severe war trauma for the past 15 years and have testified in over 170, or I have evaluated, over 170 survivors of torture, including being an expert witness in over 50 cases in the states of Arizona, Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware.
Excuse me, and did they involve applications for asylum, refugee applications as we're handling today?
Yes, they did. Some were in family court, some were criminal court, but the large majority of which were in immigration court.
Thank you. Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this point, I have no further questions, and I would submit to the court that Dr. Michulka is an expert in mental health, and particularly that of survivors of trauma.
Mr. Spiegelhalter, any questions regarding or any objections to the respondent's, the witness's credentials as an expert witness?
Just a few, Your Honor. But first, could I clarify again, what was the expertise that's being claimed?
Why don't I let the counsel state that on the record? Go ahead.
That Dr. Michulka is a mental health expert, particularly for survivors of trauma and torture.
Just a few questions. You said you've been admitted in approximately 50 cases, correct?
Yes, I have.
Are there any cases where you've not been admitted as an expert?
No, there are not.
And how long have you been doing this again? You say 15 years?
I have been working with survivors of torture and war trauma for approximately 15 years. I've been doing forensic evaluations in particular since 1991 when I received, or my 1993 when I received my doctoral degree.
And your work with survivors of torture, is that a sideline work? Is that what you do primarily?
I have done it primarily during different pieces of my career, and then I have done the forensic testing all throughout my career.
Okay, so for instance, prior to your job right now at the Liberty Center for Survivors of Torture, it appears you worked with juveniles transitioning out of detention and on probation. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Were those survivors of torture?
Some of those were immigrant and refugee young people as well, yes.
A very small number, a large number?
I would say it was about 50% of my caseload because I am a bilingual multicultural therapist. Those are the cases that I tend to get.
About 15 or 50? 50?
50%.
50%? Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then just previous to that, as a private contractor for Riddle Healthcare too, dealing with geriatric residents.
Right, that was
Objection, Your Honor. The relevance of this questioning, I believe it's been established from prior questioning that she is an expert in what she's being offered as an expert for.
Mr. Spiegelhalter?
I think that's the issue that we're trying to get to, Your Honor, rather than a conclusion. I'm simply trying to establish whether this has really been a main part of her career or not. She claims she's been doing it for 15 years, but it appears that at least some periods she would not have had much opportunity to deal with survivors of torture. And
Well, Your Honor, she has been admitted as an expert in 50 previous asylum matters before the immigration court. I think she testified to, and she's never not been admitted in an immigration court matter.
And Mr. Spiegelhalter, I'll allow you another question or two on this, but based on her record and the curriculum vitae which I'm reviewing, it seems that the witness is very qualified to be an expert in these matters. But if you want to, for the record, ask a question or two more, I'll allow it. But
we do object, so I'll ask one more question.
Go ahead.
Do you speak French fluently?
No, I do not.
And in your career in this area, do you find that it's important that the interviewer relate to the interviewee when dealing with psychological assessments?
Relate directly in their language or relate through an interpreter?
Relate directly.
In their native language, directly.
Correct.
I speak 3 other languages. I speak Spanish, Maya Quiche, and Maya Mam. I do evaluations in those languages, but I also deal very adequately with interpreters in other languages. No evaluator is going to know all of the languages for which that we interview people. I have not noted that it makes a difference when I speak the native language of the client and when I don't.
Okay. No further, Your Honor. No further questions, Your Honor, but we do object to her admission as an expert.
Okay. Well, I'm going to admit the witness as an expert at this point based on the testimony and based on the documentary record. And I'll allow her testimony. Go ahead and begin, Ms. Giancarlo.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Machulka, have you evaluated Fatima Touré?
Yes, I have.
And what was your diagnosis of Fatima?
I diagnosed Fatou with post-traumatic stress disorder of the moderate type without psychotic features.
Your Honor, I will just point out that her full evaluation can be found at Exhibit 11.
Thank you.
What, if any, tests did you administer to diagnose Fatima with PTSD?
I used a general clinical interview and the National Screening Tool for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder.
And how are these tools regarded in the psychology field?
The National Screening Tool for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder is the instrument that is most used and is considered to be valid and reliable across cultural communities.
How does the test work?
The test breaks down post-traumatic stress disorder into its component symptoms and goes through each of those symptoms with the clients one by one.
And how do you actually conduct the test?
The screening test on its own is a set of questions. The clinical interview asks spontaneous questions beforehand to find out what the client talks about on their own in terms of their psychological experience on a daily basis. When the client is done giving spontaneous information, then we go through the checklist, which goes through all of the symptoms.
And what are some of the symptoms for post-traumatic stress disorder?
The symptoms are broken down into 5 different areas, the first of which is that the person had to have had a traumatic experience that was life-threatening in some way, something that is not normal, that's something that does not normally happen. The second set of symptoms has to do with intrusive thoughts, memories, and dreams. The third set of symptoms has to do with avoidance and fear. The fourth set of symptoms has to do with a hyperactive startle response, increased anxiety, and the last set of symptoms has to do with how long the symptoms have persisted.
Okay. How would someone's culture affect a PTSD diagnosis under this test?
The PTSD diagnosis has been validated across internationally. So the symptoms themselves do not change. What changes is sometimes the experience of those symptoms for that particular client, where some clients from some countries will be more likely to have nightmares, while others may be more likely to have flashbacks.
Fatima, as you know, is a 16-year-old. Is this test appropriate for someone of Fatima's age?
The way that you administer the test is dependent on the developmental stage of the person that you're interviewing. Because it is a structured interview, it is not necessary to give the test in a different way to someone who is younger as opposed to someone who is older.
And how did Fatima score on the test?
Fatima scored with a moderate PTSD score, which is to say that she had the criteria amount of symptoms within each of the categories that were tested.
How many of the 5 conditions for PTSD diagnosis that you mentioned did Fatima meet?
She met criteria for all of the 5 areas.
And what symptoms of PTSD did Fatima present?
Fatima talked about intrusive memories and nightmares. She had flashbacks weekly. She had an exaggerated startle response. She had high levels of avoidance of her own thought processes and of other people in terms of social relationships. And she also has had these symptoms for over a year. She also talked about this being very different from her pre-trauma experience of life in which she had no symptoms of mental illness.
How do these symptoms affect how she relates her account of persecution?
When we met with Fatima, we noticed that she had a very typical symptom called disassociation. Disassociation is when, in order to get through testimony or to get through a difficult retelling of the traumatic event, the person shuts down emotionally. They look down, they show no emotion, and they really, at that point, are spending a lot of their energy controlling their emotional presentation.
How would she respond to a high-stress interview or court situation?
Most symptoms are exacerbated by high stress or court kinds of interviews, especially if the client perceives that they are in a hostile situation or in a situation where they are not believed or are at suspect.
Are you saying that we would have to lead her carefully through testimony?
Objection leading, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Is your PTSD diagnosis of Fatima compatible with her account of the persecution that she suffered?
Her symptoms were very congruent with the symptoms that we observed and recorded, and make sense logically with the story of torture and trauma that she tells.
And do you find her, did you find her credible or incredible in this regard?
We found her story of torture and trauma credible.
And upon what did you base that finding?
The way that she responded to questions spontaneously were very congruent with the way that she responded when we went through structured questions. She had a variety of symptoms that are not common and typical, and she did not present many of the symptoms that are common, that are well known in the PTSD world.
Could she have been faking any of these symptoms or malingering?
It's possible. The diagnosis of PTSD, however, is variable. As I said, you have to meet criteria in all 5 areas. Most lay people do not know what those 5 areas are and are not clear about what symptoms would look like across those 5 areas. The other thing is, of course, in West Africa, where this young woman is from, there's not as much news and education in the popular press about post-traumatic stress syndrome, what those symptoms look like, and what somebody who suffered trauma might have experienced.
I object to that last statement, Your Honor, and ask that it be stricken. It's not within her expertise what the people of Western Africa understand or what's been published in the press. I think that's getting a little far afield.
Your Honor, I would argue that her knowledge of conditions in the country is part of her expertise and is demonstrated in her curriculum vitae.
And can you point me to the page or the section of that curriculum vitae that you're alleging, you're referring to?
Her thesis is on the psychological effects of war trauma in refugees. She obviously had to do quite a significant amount of research into refugees from different cultures. She also stated that she has worked with a number of young children from various cultures.
Well, let me ask, to you, Dr. Michelka, what work have you done, if any, with West African refugees?
The Liberty Center for Survivors of Torture at this point has 68% of our clients from West African countries, Liberia, Guinea, Ghana, Mali, and it is a large percentage of the work that I have done for the past 2 years.
So can you put a number on the number of refugees or asylees, applicants that you've dealt with over the last?
In our clientele, we have over 150 clients from West Africa.
I'll allow it.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, counsel.
Dr. Machuga, would it be possible for Fatima to fake rape trauma?
Again, a woman's response to rape is extremely variable. It depends on her previous history, her age of development, her experience within that time. It would be very difficult to fake the set of symptoms and the set of reactions that Fatima has.
So, Dr. Machuga, you've stated that Fatima may display a lack of emotion that to us outside the psychology field may seem incommensurate with the highly emotional content of her torture experience. Would that be unusual for someone suffering from PTSD and rape trauma?
Absolutely not. That's one of the classic symptoms of trauma.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Spiegelhalter?
Yes, Your Honor. To hit briefly on something we were just talking about so we don't lose that train of thought, you testified a couple of times about disassociation and how someone testifying about their rape or about their trauma would not be prone to show emotion. Is that correct?
I said that they may or they may not. It really depends on, again, the psychological background of the person, their preparation in terms of previous traumas in their life, and the level of dissociation they experienced during the actual trauma.
How many times did you talk to Fatima about her trauma?
I spoke, for the evaluation, I spoke to her once for a 2.5 hour period of time at the detention center.
And you didn't speak to her on any other time?
I met with her 2 or 3 times since she has been released from detention because she had concerns with insomnia.
Okay, and did you discuss her torture on each of these occasions?
No, we focused more on the things that were happening currently.
Okay, so only once did you talk about her torture?
Yes.
And on that occasion, she didn't cry about that, for instance?
No, she was very, again, she displayed dissociation in that she looked down. She did not display any emotion at all.
You work for the Liberty Center for Survivors of Torture, correct?
Yes, I do.
Could you describe the work of that organization for me?
The Liberty Center exists to work with rehabilitation for survivors of torture. We're funded under the Torture Victims Relief Act through the federal government. We provide both training for professionals, lawyers, doctors, educators, and social workers and psychologists in the area of identifying survivors of torture and working with survivors of trauma from other cultures. And then we work directly with survivors of torture in a variety of areas, legal, social services, medical, and psychological services.
Do you receive any pay for working with people who have PTSD?
I'm the director of the center, and I get paid specifically for that role.
Do you have, if you have additional people who have PTSD, does the center receive more money from the government?
No, we do not.
Have you ever testified in court that someone did not have PTSD?
Yes, I've testified in court, and then the center itself goes through a screening process where we decide whether we are going to offer legal services to a particular client. If the client is found to be incredible, we do not, and we reject about 20% of the request for psychological evaluations.
And is PTSD universally accepted in the scientific community?
PTSD has been accepted for over now probably about 60 years, since the early 1950s. It has gone through several changes in terms of the diagnostic manual for mental disorders, but has existed since 1950 firmly.
Now, is that a yes, it's universally accepted by experts in the field?
Yes, it is.
Every expert would tell me PTSD exists.
Objection, Your Honor.
I think she's answered the question. Move on.
Now, you testified it's possible for an individual to fake PTSD, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. And the diagnostic tool, that when you say someone has faked PTSD, does that mean that they have survived the diagnostic tool, and even though they're faking, they have been diagnosed with PTSD? Is that what you mean by
I'm
that
sure
phrase?
that in some cases that does occur.
Okay. And you say that someone has a flat affect if they are, if they have PTSD. Is that correct?
No, that is one of the possible, but not the only consequence of PTSD.
So some people may have flat affect, some people may not.
Some people may have flat affects. Some people may be overwhelmed by their emotions and be unable to speak because of being overwhelmed by emotions as well.
So it's fair to say that people who suffer trauma, a fairly wide swath of people might fall into this PTSD bucket. Is that correct? I mean, it could be people who are flat affect, people who are animated, people.
No, PTSD is based on, again, the 5 different criteria, and within those 5 different criteria, there are about 20 different symptoms that are indicative of post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is not based on one symptom.
So if there are 5 criteria and there are 20 different ways to meet each criteria, you have 100 different ways to meet the PTSD test? Is that what we're
No,
saying?
you have to meet a certain scope of symptoms within each area.
Is there physical evidence of PTSD?
There is an exaggerated startle response, which actually can, there are some studies where it can be caught on very specific kinds of receptors at different points in the body in terms of when somebody hears a loud sound, they have a much higher and much quicker nervous system response. Their heart rate goes higher, their hands begin to sweat. They have some kinds of physical symptoms.
Did you test that with Fatima?
No, those are very, very complicated, sophisticated tests that are not generally done in the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are generally being done in research facilities.
Well, did you testify that she had an increased startle reflex?
She did, and that was something that we saw during the interview. If there was a sound outside, she would jump and get nervous. Those are things that she described when somebody knocks on the door, her feeling of rapid heartbeat, being unable to breathe, having her hands sweat. Those we got through observation and through her objective opinion.
But more anecdotally than hooking her up to sensors and
Yes.
less scientifically.
Objection, Your Honor.
I'll allow it. Continue.
Let's talk about the diagnosis. You said that you spent 2.5 hours with her, and then on other occasions you didn't talk about the torture at all. Is that correct?
It's not that we didn't talk about the torture at all. We did not go through a full torture interview. We were dealing very specifically with her nightmares and insomnia, which had something to do with the torture, but we were not going through a torture history at that point.
Okay. Well, you said that she was missing symptoms. Is that correct?
Sure. Within the 20 symptoms within each of the areas, different individuals are going to have different experiences depending on their own personal mental health history, the mental health predisposition within their family and culture, and other kinds of, for other kinds of reasons. So there are some very classic symptoms that Fatima did not exhibit, again, that are more well known, and there are some more symptoms that are common but that have not been publicized that she did exhibit.
Any further questions?
Do I need to wrap up, Your Honor? Is that
Yes, you do. It's getting rather late. And so
message received? I think that's all the questions I have.
Okay, very briefly, any redirect from...
Very briefly, Your Honor. Did you think at any point, and do you think now, that Fatima faked PTSD or malingered?
No, I do not.
Thank you.
I just have one question, Doctor, and that is, if I'm reading your statement right and listening to your testimony, what you can testify to is that something very bad happened, there was after effects, but you, for example, would there be a difference? Would you be able to distinguish if this was some type of domestic violence or the causation was some type of personal thing where she suffered and a similar type injury or harm? You can point the causation to...
What I would say is that her symptoms are very congruent with the specific story, with the specific experiences that she described to us. The particular kinds of nightmares that she's having, the flashbacks, are all around the very specific incidents that she describes in her testimony.
All right, counsel, first of all, are there any other witnesses or any other evidence to be submitted from either side?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Anything else from respondent?
Your Honor, we would like to make a closing statement.
All right. All right, I will allow a brief closing. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Our client, who is a 16-year-old child, Fatima Touré, comes before this honorable immigration court seeking the protection of the United States. You have heard her credible testimony. It has been consistent, detailed, and specific throughout. Ms. Touré has proven that she's experienced and faces persecution in Guinea. She was repeatedly and viciously harassed, threatened, imprisoned, detained, beaten, and raped, all as a child, by dictatorial President Conté's presidential guard. There are 3 reasons why this misfortune befell her. 3 reasons that are protected by U.S. asylum law. She was persecuted because of her Malinke ethnicity, as well as her actual and imputed political opinion opposed to the dictatorial regime of President Conté, as well as the 3rd reason is because of her family relationship, her kinship relationship to her uncle, who was a very prominent political activist. There's no doubt that Fatima was persecuted. She was arrested 7 times, handcuffed, and taken to jail by armed presidential guards. It is notable that these presidential guards lacked any legal authority to conduct an arrest and to detain her, and this has been substantiated by our expert testimony, as well as Ghanaian law that has been submitted to the record. Each time that she had been arrested and detained, she was physically and psychologically abused. She sustained significant injuries during the course of this abuse. She has presented to the court 4 scars to her finger, her head, and her knees. She suffered rape in their custody. The psychological harm lingers to date. She contends with post-traumatic stress disorder and faces further harm in Guinea without adequate mental health care. The Board of Immigration Appeals has instructed judges to evaluate the totality of the circumstances when deciding asylum claims. In this case, all of the torture, and particularly the physical and psychological abuse and the rape, considered collectively, compel the conclusion that Fatima suffered persecution in the strongest sense of the word. There's a compelling case to be made that she deserves asylum based on past persecution alone, irrespective of a threat, individualized threat of future persecution. Matter of DV, Board of Immigration Appeals decision stands for the proposition that a person who has suffered rape constitutes past persecution. Fatima is now alone in the United States and contends with very significant psychological disabilities related to the rape. Fatima also has met her burden of proof for showing a fear of future persecution if returned to Guinea. In this case, both for past persecution and future persecution, the four matter of Acosta elements are satisfied. She was harmed, clearly harmed, because of her relationship to her uncle, political opponent, her own political activities, as well as her Malinke ethnicities.
Counsel, let me stop you there just briefly. I'm going to cut this short briefly, but her own political activities, I'm not sure I heard that in the testimony, and her own political activities, where was that?
She was politically active in Guinea and attended meetings, and when the guards, when she was arrested and detained, the guards were targeting her both because she was Malinke and imputing a political opinion.
Well, I can understand that, again, and I'll ask you to move on, but I just did not hear in the testimony much evidence of her own political activities.
In terms of the nexus with family, as the court knows, there are several cases which stand for the proposition that the immediate family can be a cognizable particular social group for asylum eligibility. Geber Michael from the First Circuit establishes that case, and it was followed recently by the Ninth Circuit in Chen. So, because of her family relation to her uncle, who was really acting as a de facto father to her, she experienced past persecution and faces future persecution if she's returned as part of the immediate family. If the court feels that those cases do not apply, because technically, legally, he was not her father, there is also matter of H, Board of Immigration Appeals decision standing for the proposition that kinship structures can constitute a particular social group. So therefore, her extended family and relationship to the uncle could also constitute a particular social group. As you heard from expert witnesses today, the Malinke definitely demonstrate different cultural and physical characteristics which are known to others within Guinea, and that the president's tribe is the Susu tribe, and there's a divide and conquer strategy between the groups. So if you're Malinke, you can have a political opinion imputed against you, and she's readily identifiable as Malinke, both by her last name as well as because of her physical features. There is no way that she could hide being Malinke. Finally, regarding her testimony, we do want the court to take note of what the expert witness, the mental health expert witness, had to say, that survivors of post-traumatic stress disorder might not necessarily testify as cogently or with, respond with emotions that we would necessarily expect during testimony. Their demeanor sometimes can be cold, can be diffident, can be aloof when we're expecting more emotion from the witness. We finally want to conclude with that, with noting that for purposes of asylum eligibility, Fatima has clearly met her burden to just show a 10% risk of persecution if she's returned to Guinea, a 1 in 10 chance that she would be harmed. She also has met her burden based on the egregious past persecution that she experienced, including rape and torture, that she faces a 50% risk, a more than 50% risk of harm if she returns to Guinea under withholding of removal, and should be granted withholding of removal as well as asylum. If the court is not going to grant asylum or withholding of removal, we also contend that she has met her burden of proof that she has experienced and faces torture in Guinea, torture and merits protection under the United Nations Convention Against Torture, Article 3 of the United Nations Convention Against Torture. It is notable that she has evidenced her torture to the court in the forms of the scars, the injuries that she sustained from the beatings that were inflicted, as well as rape has also been held under international case law, which is cited in our brief, to constitute a form of torture. In the alternative, if our relief requested is not granted, we would be forced to seek voluntary departure.
I don't think she's statutorily eligible for voluntary departure at this point, but I will certainly consider your relief applications At this point, I turn it over to the Service Council
Thank
to,
you, Your Honor.
thank you. Mr. Spiegelhalter?
Yes, Your Honor. I just want to touch very briefly on what I would submit are some of the most important considerations in this case, and starting first with credibility. She testified that her uncle, every Sunday, this uncle with whom she lived, went and attended meetings of the UFR, and yet she could not testify as to the time of day that he did that. She did not know what happened. She did not know what he did. She did not know who else was there. She also testified that she did not know that the documents that she carried with her were forged, and yet being 16 years old and traveling with documents that may or may not have false information, and which she knows that she did not obtain on her own, call this kind of testimony into question. She put all of her faith in a man named Tonton, but did not know his last name and could not testify about it. She could not testify the number of soldiers that came to her school. She could not testify whether they were the same or they were different. Stated simply, her credibility, we submit, must be called into question. It is not enough to carry her burden of proof. The proof of the torture. We heard from an expert who talked about PTSD, but I note that there are literally, it appears to be hundreds of combinations of symptoms that one could exhibit. Our respondent here did not exhibit classic symptoms. She did exhibit other symptoms, and yet it was the same. She had PTSD. Her affect could have been excitable. Her affect could have been no affect whatsoever, and yet either way it was going to turn out to be PTSD. She didn't cry during meetings with her psychologist, and yet she cried almost as if on command in this court. All of these call into question whether PTSD is really a solid basis for determining that there had been past torture. And I also note that in some of the materials that the respondent submitted, they said that there had been a pelvic exam, and yet that had turned up no evidence of a sexual assault. Now, to touch basically on the four bases which are claimed here, at least in principle, she nearly abandoned on the stand political opinion as a basis for her claim on asylum. She said that it was her relation to her uncle and her ethnicity that were the bases for her asylum claim, and that was in direct answer to a question that Your Honor posed to her. And it was a good thing she did. From the testimony that we have and from the documents we have, there's no reason to believe that the government would have been aware that she was active in any kind of dissident organization, and even more pointedly, whether what she did could be called active, even if the government were aware of it. She did not speak in public. She attended a few speeches. She was not particularly active. She certainly was not active on the level of other people that she testified about. And again, asking for her uncle, the fact that the guards asked for her uncle repeatedly is not evidence that she had a political opinion. They never stated anything directly to her about her political opinion. Instead, they beat her, allegedly, and asked her where her uncle was. Ethnicity as a basis for her claim. I asked her on cross-examination whether the people around her were Malinke. She testified that they were not taken, they were not beaten, they were not raped. Using ethnic slurs, I submit, is simply not enough. While reprehensible, it does not mean that she was seized and that she was beaten, and certainly not that she was raped because she was of that particular origin. I do not doubt that some people within that country might detest other ethnicities, but again, that was not the reason she was taken. That was not the reason she was beaten or raped, allegedly. With regard to social group, I submit that the case law on this point would not extend to calling her distant cousin, who she calls uncle or father in different instances, as a part of her nuclear family. The cases on this point, Geber Michael and Aguirre Cervantes, do not support extending this to someone that is not her nuclear family. She could have lived anywhere. She could have lived elsewhere. She didn't have to live with her distant cousin, who the government sought. And there was no evidence that, although she surmises that because she can't get a hold of some of her family, although I note she can get a hold of her mother, that maybe they are after the social group that is constituted by her nuclear family, but her mother appears to be out of prison or somewhat safe in that she can talk on the phone to someone in the United States, or she can at least be contacted. And also I note in her affidavit that she stated that the younger children that were at the home when the guards came and seized her to ask the first time where her father was, where her uncle was, were not taken. So members of this alleged social group that have been persecuted are in fact left alone. And the differentiation that was there was that those younger members would not know where her uncle was. So the issue was, were they coming to get her because they wanted to know where her uncle was, a man who actually was active allegedly in this organization, or were they after the social group? I believe, I submit, that the evidence shows that it was not the social group. It was the location of her uncle. And being persecuted in order to find out the location of one's uncle is not a recognized ground for asylum. She could have relocated. She testified that she could not get a government document where she was, and yet only had to drive 40 kilometers away. And she could go to a government building, talk to government officials, talk to government employees, and get a government document that would allow her to travel outside of the country. If this country is allegedly unified, then it shows one of two things. Either she could drive 40 miles away and live, if she weren't living with her uncle, and she would have this name, this Malinke name, that is apparently common to many people. There's no reason to believe that these government officials who were so unfamiliar with her that they would not refuse her a document or report her back to headquarters would know that she was related to this uncle if the social group is the basis. Or maybe what it actually means is it's not the government that is persecuting her if she's being persecuted in actuality, but it is soldiers who are out for their own personal gratification, who have singled out a young lady who, whatever reason it may be, but what it does mean is that she could be elsewhere in the country, or that the government is not in control of all segments if it really is the presidential guards that are after her. To raise another issue, it could be a valid government investigation of her uncle, that she has been seized and they're asking where she was. She testified that she doesn't know what he does on behalf of this dissident organization, and what she did testify is that someone with whom her uncle...
Let me stop you there, counsel.
Okay.
You're saying that the government arresting her and pulling her out from school, if that's true, would be a valid government investigation when they were seeking out her uncle?
It is a possibility that at some point it became ultra-virus. There's no doubt about that. If there was a rape, that's not acceptable. But it is possible that they took members of the family. What I'm saying is, if they came and arrested members of the family, wherever it might be, to ask them questions about where her uncle was, that could be part of a valid investigation. And indeed, what we do know is that the uncle consorted with a man who was able to give her forged documents.
But you're not seriously arguing that the government actions in this case were a valid government investigation?
No, not once they went past. I would submit that perhaps the first arrest, investigative arrest under their laws, could be a perfectly valid exercise of their police powers.
Okay.
And then finally, I would also submit that there is another reason that's highly likely for why she would relocate to the United States, and that is that, as she testifies and as other people testify, life in Guinea is rough, regardless of whether you've been singled out or not. She has relatives that have come to the United States before to seek a better education and a life that is easier, and she testified that if she were allowed to stay in the United States, that's exactly what she planned to do. And then finally, I submit that a discretionary denial for her use of forged documents is appropriate.
Okay. Thank you, counsel. The respondent is a 16-year-old female. She entered the United States in November of the past year. At that point, she entered apparently with documents belonging to another individual. She was stopped at entry at JFK Airport. At that point, she was later placed into removal proceedings. In analyzing this case, first of all, the court finds the respondent to be credible in some aspects of her case. However, the court does accept the service position that there are parts that just do not seem plausible or credible. The court again states it does not accept the respondent's testimony regarding her lack of knowledge on the means of entry into the United States. As service counsel points out, it does seem implausible also that the respondent, being a political individual herself, as claimed by the respondent's counsel, would not know more about her uncle's involvement, given that her uncle is a leader within the UFR and someone highly respected. Having said that, the court does find, however, the respondent's testimony regarding her arrest and detention to be credible. The court observed the respondent's demeanor, and she was quite emotional when she came to certain parts of her testimony, and the court does find that she was credible regarding the arrest and detention which she suffered. New paragraph. A refugee is defined as an individual who is unable or unwilling to avail himself or herself of the protection of her home country because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Well-founded fear is described as a reasonable fear. It contains both a subjective and an objective component. An individual may establish eligibility or a well-founded fear of persecution by showing that she has been victimized by past persecution on account of one of the 5 stated grounds. This showing of past persecution creates a presumption of a well-founded fear of future persecution. An applicant must show more than just that she has been persecuted. She must show also some direct or circumstantial evidence that harm is on account of one of the 5 statutory grounds. New paragraph. In this case, the court finds the respondent has been the victim of past persecution. The respondent has been arrested several times. She has been beaten. She has been raped. As stated, her testimony on this point, as was the testimony of the psychologist, credible. The court finds, in addition, that her family and she have been stopped, harassed, or their home invaded on 6 other occasions. New paragraph. The respondent testified that there are several reasons that she suffered this harm. The court will first of all deal with the ones that the court does not accept. Number 1, the court does not accept that the respondent herself was politically involved. The respondent showed no real testimony regarding her own political involvement. Number 2, the court also does not accept that the respondent was harassed or harmed because of her Malinke tribal membership. The court, however, does believe that the respondent proved that she was harmed because of her imputed political opinion. The precedent case law on this issue states that when a government exerts its power against an individual and that individual has committed no criminal activity, the presumption or the implication is that that harm is politically motivated. And that is the case of INS versus Hernandez-Ortiz. The court found no evidence the respondent had committed any criminal activity in spite of the statements made by service counsel in closing argument. There is simply no evidence of that. As the other part of the respondent's, quote, on account of, end of quote, argument is her membership in her family. Service counsel makes a point that this is really stretching the definition of family, and I'm not certain that a distant cousin would make the family group membership stand. However, there is recent precedent case law regarding imputed family membership and imputed membership in a social group. In this particular case, the respondent called this individual her uncle. Apparently, he was known to her and others as a close family member. The government certainly saw that, and the court believes also that she was targeted because of imputed membership in a particular social group, that social group being her family. The BIA precedent case law, as well as several circuit court cases, find that kinship is an immutable characteristic which can establish the basis for a social group argument. New paragraph. In summary, the court finds that the respondent is statutorily eligible for asylum and that she has been victimized by past persecution on account of imputed political opinion and imputed membership in a particular social group. On the issue of discretion, there is one negative discretionary factor, and that is her fraudulent entry into the United States. Again, this has been addressed by the board in precedent case law, matter of PULA, P-U-L-A. The board has stated that the only negative factor is the fraudulent circumvention of immigration laws, that is not a significant enough factor on which to deny a statutorily eligible asylum applicant relief. New paragraph. The court does agree with counsel that the regulations indicate that when the government is the persecutor, there is a presumption that harm extends countrywide. And in this case, the government was the persecutor. New paragraph. In summary, the court finds the respondent eligible for asylum and will grant that application. The court need not address the other 2 forms of relief, the withholding of removal application and torture convention claim, but the court does agree that there is at a minimum a 50% chance or better that the respondent would be harmed should she be returned to her native country. and the following order will be entered. It is ordered that the application for asylum by the respondent be granted. To Respondents' Counsel, you've heard my decision. I assume you accept that decision at this point?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And Mr. Spiegelhalter, the service reserve or accept?
We reserve.
Okay. At this point, I'd remind you that an appeal has to be filed and received at the board within 30 days. And so please have that in. And Mr. I just want to wish you the best of luck here in the United States. Again, stay in touch with your attorneys, and you'll know within 30 days whether an appeal has been filed on your case. And if there's nothing further for me to decide, we'll be off the record at this point.
Thank you, Your Honor. Assistance from the government.
This has been a very difficult for me to discuss what happened to me because it has been very traumatic, and but as I got to know the lawyers, you know, they were very nice to me, and we became very close, and now I feel like they are almost a part of my family because they have helped me so much. And I didn't really like the mental evaluation because it is something that is not accepted really in my country, but you know, I understand that this is what the court needs to hear. I didn't understand everything that went on in court, but after Dr. Macholka's testimony, I understood a little better what the case was, and I am very happy to have received asylum, and I can't wait to start a new life, and I hope that I never have to think about this or talk about this again, and I just can't wait to become a new person.
What I noticed in going against pro bono attorneys is there are major differences between a normal pro bono attorney and someone who maybe does immigration law. Pro bono attorneys may spend more time preparing because this is their opportunity to be in court to actually make presentations, which means sometimes we're inundated with additional documentation, but more likely that the actual record has all the documents that we would find necessary. There were several issues in this case that I thought were typical of many cases. I find that credibility is always an important issue, and if nothing else, it's because many of these people come to the United States and there's no other way to test whether their claim is real other than to ask whether they're credible or try to find out whether they're credible. It's also important that the documentation that they do manage to come along is tested well. So one thing you'll find is that trial attorneys often try to test documents forensically to ensure that the people, what they're saying is actually true through sometimes the only way that it's able to prove from the outside that it is true, by testing documents. And that's something that we saw in this case as well.
This was really a challenging and inspiring experience. Asylum law is an incredible area to get involved in where you can make a powerful difference in bringing justice to the lives of very vulnerable people who are here just seeking freedom and safety in the United States. The knowledge and skills that I gained in the course of representing our client were incredible, and skills that I definitely, can now use in my private practice. We had the experience of client interviewing, as well as affidavit preparation, as well as witness preparation, preparing for, dealing with a client subjected to cross-examination. It was a complete, lesson in trial advocacy. I've never prepared a closing statement before. It was exciting and invigorating. It also was really great for people at our firm because they got excited excited by the work that we were doing, and we were able to bring in paralegals to help us out on different aspects of the case, as well as secretaries were helping us as well, and our partners were very enthusiastic about, about our representation, and really did afford the time and resources necessary that we needed to zealously advocate for our client. It was also a great experience working with an interpreter. That was something very new, and really figuring out how to ensure, accurate interpretation with an interpreter. And there are just incredible resources out there for people to actually get involved in these cases and provide quality representation to people. There are many listservs out there of expert immigration practitioners that people can reach out and get advice on how to prepare clients' cases. And the case law is pretty elastic, so one really needs some kind of rigorous education on how to hone the client's case to be able to meet the statutory definition of refugee. But I just found it to be a really exciting experience. It was also really great in terms of having several attorneys at my firm working on this case, because we were able to forge a really effective division of labor. When I realized that my client was bonding better with my colleague, who was a woman attorney, particularly given her traumatic experiences of having been raped, I realized that it would be better, or we realized together that it would be better that my colleague conduct the direct examination, and I would focus more on the legal arguments and procedural arguments, and we worked in tandem on that. But we were able to divide the case into very concrete, discrete tasks, and in the course of it, now I think we've got the basis to collaborate on other projects in the future. So it really is very relevant also for team building at law firms. So I would definitely recommend it to anyone, and the resources and support are there to get involved, and you can make an incredible difference in the lives of, children as well as adults who are fleeing persecution and deserve the best our laws have to offer.
Well, it's really hard to express just how happy I am about this case. I mean, not only just the outcome, but the entire experience. I've been a tax attorney with my firm for 5 years now, and I don't litigate, and I was really nervous about, the prospect of going to court and playing a big part in the litigation of this case. And also, I'm used to dealing with representatives of our corporate clients, and so one thing I really wanted to do with this case was make sure it was very client-centered. This isn't a big corporate client. This is a very vulnerable girl who has lost control of a lot of things in her life, and I wanted her to be in control of this case. Another big part of that was I knew how important it was to create trust among the three of us. If she doesn't trust us, she's not going to tell us the full story, and credibility is really the most crucial part of asylum cases. I think another really important part of our case was the help we got from experts. It's not just a document written by an expert that we pulled off the internet. This was the actual expert coming to testify in court about our client, and that makes a huge difference in asylum cases as well. It was difficult a lot of times. I mean, I really felt for my client, and I think I probably had some secondary trauma. I know that I lost some sleep over this case, and I felt like I actually, relived what she went through and just thought about it quite a bit. So it was just really exciting for me when we won her case. And I think we have, a really enduring bond with our client. I think of her, I guess, as my little sister, and I'm looking forward to seeing her graduate from high school and go to college.
What I saw from this case, number one, is the value of attorneys to asylum applicants. In this particular case, for example, the respondent who had what I thought was a relatively strong case, but so many things can go wrong. Number one, the way she tells her story. Number two, the emotional barriers that they face, as well as language barriers. Attorneys coming in, helping an individual get emotionally able to tell their story. The most important part of any case is the story that's told on the stand by the asylum applicant. And attorneys, in this case especially, you saw that the pro bono attorneys spent hours and hours getting her to the point where she could tell her story in a consistent way that came off credible. There still were some problems with credibility, but had they not sat with her and spent a bunch of time with her getting to that point, I think there would have been major problems with credibility. The other part that pro bono attorneys played in this case, which was significant, was the role of the expert witness. And again, pro bono attorneys and just anyone that's attorneys coming in, getting experts, getting the documents necessary from overseas make a huge difference. In the cases that I've seen, it is a small percentage that are granted, and it's probably less than 20% of these cases that are granted, 20 to 25% on a nationwide average, or maybe less. That increases significantly when there is an attorney involved, getting an applicant ready to present their case, getting the documents necessary. In this case, Service Counsel for the Department of Homeland Security also was extremely prepared and made strong points. Had there not been an attorney on the other side, it's very likely that in spite of the fact that she underwent severe hardship, she would not have been granted, because it's not just showing the harm, it's not just showing that bad things happen to you, you also have to establish why these things, or at least give a reasonable basis to show why these things happened. And that was a major issue in this case, and I think counsel for both sides battled that out, and I found that the benefit of the doubt in this case should have gone with the applicant. But there were issues there right through. The one thing I think I wanted to say is the benefit to the court. I mean, not only for us, when we come in as judges and we see these cases prepared and the documents there and the witness gets on the stand and you can tell that they work with them, it makes a huge difference in the mind of the judge in terms of whether or not he's going to grant or deny a case. And that is something that is not really stated in any law book, but it's there. When you know the case has been prepared and you know people put effort in, it really makes a difference. Lastly, I think the attorneys in this case come away with a huge benefit. You take somebody through what's probably the darkest part of their life and get them through that to the other side, and it's something that nobody ever forgets. And I think you see the attorneys and the asylum applicant are both pretty much changed for the better forever. So it was a good case. It was well represented on both sides, and I granted it.
I hope this video has been informative. If you reach an impasse when representing an asylum seeker, refer back to the video and accompanying training materials. Representing an asylum seeker pro bono makes a world of difference in their lives. Many people, including myself, have found that it really is a life-changing experience. As lawyers, we have special skills and knowledge. I encourage you to use yours on behalf of someone in need.